You're watching Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.
Welcome on into Toronto Sports Rush. It has been an exciting time in hockey, of course. We are still beaming over the Four Nations face-off and everything that came from that. And NHL action was off to a fiery start on the weekend. Lots of games, and so many games I actually lost track of them all. But we're really excited to have Pierre McGuire here for our McGuire Mondays. Pierre, I missed you last week because I was stuck in Montreal, unfortunately. Stuck in Montreal would normally be something you'd want to happen, but this was not what I wanted because of the snow. But I know that you were you've had a lot of cool stuff going on recently. And I want to go back to first and foremost, you were at the Four Nations final. What was that like, being there to experience one of the most anticipated hockey games of this generation?
It was fantastic, and a tribute to the league, to the players, to the officials, but more so to the great fans of hockey, both in Montreal and in Boston. I just thought the entire event was really well handled. If the players don't play hard, Julie, it's really not an event. Those players left it out there. They all competed as hard as they could. I've never seen hockey played at that kind of a pace before. I thought it was fantastic for the sport. Unfortunately, there are some injuries coming out of it, which I think will be problematic long term in terms of whether they want to revisit this type of format. But all that being said, it was just a spectacular opportunity to really watch high-level hockey.
Right, and you've been at the front seat of so many different international events, and this was the first one, as we know, in 9 years. When you look back to the World Cup, Sochi, Vancouver 2010, all these different events, I mean, you said it's the sort of the hardest, the best hockey you've ever seen, but like, how would you say the range is? Like, what is the gap from what you just saw to what you had seen in the past?
Well, that's a great question. I think the Olympics are pretty high. Stanley Cup Finals really high. I thought a lot of what happened in this event in particular was level to the Stanley Cup Final. I just think there's a little more physicality in the Stanley Cup Final because there's a sense of familiarity that builds up over a 7-game series, or depending how long the series goes, obviously. But the scouting is so intense. The players are playing, obviously for something that's really cherished, the Stanley Cup. But I thought the pace of this was the fastest I'd ever seen. Didn't mean it was the most ferocious, but I just thought the pace was really good. It was definitely at a Stanley Cup level pace, if not higher.
Were you, because we haven't had a chance to talk about this, but were you surprised to see the 3 fights in 9 seconds?
Well, yeah, I guess I was. Julie, it's interesting because we're going to have Olympics next year, and that's going to be really exciting. But if you fight in the Olympics, you're out. Like, you're out of that game and probably the next game too. This was a different event. And what I laughed about, and it wasn't funny, but everybody kept saying this is international hockey. It wasn't international hockey. This was an NHL event on NHL ice in NHL buildings with NHL officials,
right.
And every player that played was an NHL player. So it also had NHL rules. So fighting was allowed. When you go to the Olympics, it's completely different. So was I surprised by the 3 fights? Probably not. I didn't like the fact that they were staged. I didn't like that. But all in all, they move along, and it definitely created a buzz around the sport. There's no question.
Yeah, I think you make such a good point. People don't really realize the fact that the Olympics is so different in the fact that there's no fighting, but then also the ice, how it's so much bigger. Like I feel like that's something a lot of us missed talking about because we're thinking this feels like the Olympics because we haven't had it in so long, but it's completely different. But I want to move on to the fact that you were at Mario Lemieux's fantasy camp this past weekend, and it's something I've always heard about from people, but I have no idea really what goes on and what it's like. So, fill us in. What was the whole experience like?
I'm still here. I'm still working. Mario's camp.
Right, you just got off the ice. I apologize. Yeah.
I did. No, it's okay. I did just get off the ice. Mario's camping between 70 and 80 campers. They're from all over the world. We have men, we have women. It's an amazing event. This is my 3rd opportunity to work at it for Mario, and his foundation. It does so much good work for the city of Pittsburgh and for cancer research in particular. It's just phenomenal. It really is, the Mario Lemieux Foundation. So tons of Hall of Famers here, whether it's Joey Mullen, whether it's, a guy like Kevin Stevens, Bernie Nichols, you go down the line, Mario Lemieux, Larry Murphy. It's just Mark Recchi. You go down and you look at all the guys that are working here, and they all come because it's Mario. Every single person comes because it's Mario, and he's just an amazing host. He's an awesome ambassador, and it's a privilege and an honor to be here every year.
I love that. That's a fantastic opportunity to be a part of. I will say, I wish that I love the fact that the NHL did the LA Strong event with having first responders play in this game with a lot of celebrities and former NHLers, and it was to raise money for the fires. But it was too bad that it was on sort of the same time as Lemieux's camp, because I feel like there's probably a crossover of people that would have been there, whatnot. I was trying to watch it, but then it went in the States. It was on, and then it went to the air guitar championships here, the LA Strong event. If anyone doesn't know, it was pretty interesting. Like Justin Bieber was playing, and Mark Messier, and actually a bunch of guys I used to skate with in LA, and it was cool watching it. But then, halfway through went to the air guitar championships, which actually was also pretty interesting to see as well. But Pierre,
I had no idea I was at the Pittsburgh Penguin game, Julie, on Saturday and Sunday afternoon. Again, Mario hosted us at that. I watched the Rangers come from behind to beat the Pittsburgh Penguins, and the game before I saw a real good Washington Capitals team beat the Pittsburgh Penguins. The Washington Capitals, Julie, are for real, by the way. They really are. I think the two best teams in the East right now are the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Washington Capitals.
Wow. Okay. Before we get to the Leafs, Ovi with the hat trick. He's now 13 goals away from Gretzky. I mean, at this point, you got to think he's going to do it in this amount of time, maybe? I don't know.
Well, I think it's still a reach for him to get it done this year. The fact that he had 3 yesterday against Edmonton was huge, tremendously huge. I watched him play on Saturday. He hasn't missed much. I mean, he's still got tempo to his game. He can still shoot the puck. They're very well. By the way, the Washington Capitals, Spencer Carberry and his staff with Kirk Muller and Scotty Allen, that they're good. Like, they're well coached. Yeah. They're the Washington Capitals are a big time surprise. Nobody counted on them to be this good, and they really are a good team.
Do you think, in what way, because the fact they were the one NHL team without anyone going to Four Nations face-off, that will help them?
I was shocked that John Carlson wasn't there. I was shocked that Tommy Wilson wasn't there. Obviously, with no Russian, since Ovechkin's not going to be there. But no, I was just surprised at Carlson and Wilson, two players that I really respect. And Johnny Carlson's been around international hockey for the Americans for a long time. You go back to his golden goal in Saskatoon in 2010, winning for the U.S. over Canada in the World Junior. And again, I thought, even though Canada won the Four Nation, I thought that Tommy Wilson on small ice would have made a big difference in that game. I'm not sure there would have been as much desire to have those 3 fights that you were alluding to if Tommy Wilson would have been in the lineup for Canada.
I think they probably would have changed how they constructed the lineup had they known what was going to be going down between the two. And also, as EJ and I acknowledged last week, we can't ignore the fact that there was, of course, a lot of political tensions going on between the two countries. And that added a whole other layer to this, which is why I think that the Olympics will be completely different for a variety of reasons. But I think that that hockey game is just almost like a moment in time that I'm not sure we'll ever have something like that again, but we will have, because of just these intangibles that sort of led up to the fact that this was just such a, there's just so much tension for it. But let's get to what our listeners want to hear now is Leafs back in action, and they're looking pretty good coming back into NHL play. 2 wins, a 6-3 win over Carolina Hurricanes, and then a 5-2 win over, who did they play last night? Why am I forgetting this? Chicago. Their first regulation win in Chicago since 2003, which is such a wild stat. When you're looking, Pierre, at just this small sample size, them coming back, what are some of the biggest positives you like about what you're seeing?
The way they're stout defensively, the way Anthony Stolarz has come back from injury, I think is really important. The tandem with he and Joe Woll in goal, it's really positive for Toronto. I like the fact they can bring a guy up like Alex Steves, who I saw play at Notre Dame, an undrafted player who's ripping the American League apart. Bring him up and he can score in his first game. I thought that was tremendous. I like the fact that Max Domi had 2 assists in the win over Chicago. There was a chance that he might not even play. His father's here at the Mario Lemieux camp, Ty, and we were talking about the potential that Max might have had a concussion from the night before because he got cross-checked in the head, but he was fine. He had 2 assists. I like the unsung heroes that are competing and helping for the Toronto Maple Leafs actually establish a bunch of stuff. So I'm very, very positive about Toronto. I've been all positive all year, and I'm going to stay positive. I think they're a real good team.
Right. And I think that when you touch on Max Domi there, it's nice to see him being able to get some stuff done because, I was just listening to how I didn't have this feed, but Gord Miller, I guess, was discussing how the last time they won was in 2003 and sort of going through the lineup. And he was talking about Ty Domi, and then Max Domi had a shot that went off the post or the crossbar, and it would have been just so perfect for like that moment to have happened. But I think when you look at Max Domi, Bobby McMahon, and then Nick Robertson, that line seemed to do really well against Chicago, and the depth now sort of starting to come together. Maybe what do you think about, how would you sort of rank maybe the bottom 6 at this point as we look ahead to what might happen before the trade deadline?
Well, I think they're pretty good. I mean, David Kampf in the 4 hole is a real good number 4 center. I talked to one of his former coaches, Joel Quenneville, not very long ago, and Joel was telling me how important Kampf could be for a Toronto Maple Leaf team, especially if he's playing in the 4 hole, and I agree with Joel 100%. I like the fact that Bobby McMahon just continues to skate and eat up ice and get points, and that's really important. Nick Robertson's 2 goals against Chicago were huge. Not just for him, but for the team as well, and the confidence he must have going into the last quarter of the season must be huge. So I kind of like where the Leafs are right now as a group. Do they need another center iceman? Probably. Could they use another offensive defenseman or elite puck defenseman? Probably. If they had those 2 things, I think they're a legitimate Stanley Cup contender. I really do.
So, but what if they could only add one? And it seems as though the center is the priority over the defenseman. How would you rank then their capabilities of being a Stanley Cup contender?
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%, Julie. I do think they need to add a centerman, and if they do, I still think they have a legitimate chance to win. You know, the biggest part, I think, for Toronto is just getting past the first round. And then I think once they establish themselves as a playoff team, the world could be their oyster. It really could, but they have to get past the first round. I think the one way they can do that is just overwhelm whomever they would play with depth down the middle, because I do think they're better defensively. I do think they're better in goal. They obviously have quick strike offensive capabilities, especially when you look at Marner, when you look at Matthews, when you look at Nylander, the depth scoring that they're starting to get from a player like Bobby McMahon or Matthew Nyes. There's a lot to like about Toronto, a lot to like.
Right. And then how much we've seen that injuries have been a big theme this year for the Leafs. We've talked about it a bit, but like how much when you're looking ahead to the playoffs and so much of it is, who's in the lineup, who's healthy, and knowing that they've had injury issues this entire year, how much does that play into what they decide to do around the deadline?
I don't think it'll play much of a role. I don't. You can't legislate against injuries. Sometimes you have bad luck and guys get hurt. Sometimes you have really good luck and nobody gets hurt. I like the fact that when they've had injuries, guys have been able to come in, step up, and play better. And so they're kind of establishing more internal depth because of the injuries that they're having. So I think that's more of a positive than a negative. But I don't think that'll play a role in terms of what they do at the deadline.
Okay. I was hearing from a source that I was just talking to. Don't you love just saying I was talking to a source? It always makes me feel really cool. That's just somebody who has information, and I'm not saying their name. And they said, there's been a lot of, there's been a lot of attention around Brayden Schenn as somebody who the Leafs are looking at. He has a no move clause, so he would have to, decide to waive that. And then also the Blues, I've been told, are looking to kind of offload, it seems, because we're going to, I guess, find out real soon a lot of bubble teams that seem to maybe be looking to make a push and could be in the playoffs, but like they're not going to. So even like the Rangers or something like that, like there's just this is such an interesting time because so many teams are sort of in that, like, are we buying or selling? It's just, they're like scalpers, like buying or selling, guys outside the stadium for tickets. But with Braden Schenn, if he was to be, I know the asking price would be real big from Doug Armstrong, but if the Leafs were able to acquire a guy like Braden Schenn, like how much more confidence would you have in them in being a team that would be would they be the Stanley Cup favorite then?
In my opinion, they would be from the East. Here's the one thing I can tell you. If they had Brayden Schenn, you're bringing a Stanley Cup champion, a guy that's very familiar with how Craig Berube coaches, and a guy that won't be intimidated by the big theater of Toronto. He will not. If you ever acquire him, I think there'll be other people that'll want to try to get Brayden Schenn. One of them might be the New Jersey Devils. It's something to pay attention to. But if Toronto were to add him, I think that makes them an instantaneous favorite from the East to go to the Stanley Cup final.
How likely do you think it is that they're able to get him and meet Doug Armstrong's, whatever the asking price is? We're not sure what that would be.
Yeah, I don't know what the price point would be. I think they can do it. I don't think that's something that'll intimidate them. I think at some point Toronto's going to put all their chips to the middle of the table and say, we're all in. I don't see why they wouldn't. It's a fluid type situation in the Eastern Conference right now. Actually, on both sides, I was sitting around with a bunch of, like I said, I'm at Mario's camp, and all these great Hall of Fame players are here. And they said it's the first time in a long time where everybody's like, how many teams could win the Cup? And you're probably looking at 4 or 5 teams where you say, oh, they could win, or they. So it's kind of interesting to see how hockey guys are really looking at it as well.
Yeah, especially, you have to say this is the best Leafs team we've seen in a very long time in terms of the depth. We talked about the defense, the goaltending, and look at Chris Tanev and the fact this past weekend, what he's done. Do you think he's performed better than what maybe people in the Leafs or Leafs fans would have imagined?
No, because he's got the great history with Brad Treliving in Calgary. So I think the Leafs knew exactly what they were getting when they got Chris Tanev. I was so excited. I thought that was one of the better. He and Stolars were 2 of the better signings in the offseason. They really were. And Tanev's been great for them. And Chris does a lot of. I was really surprised when Canada had injuries on the back end that he didn't get a call. I thought that he would have been a real good fit for Team Canada.
Yes, same. I wondered that.
Yeah.
So then I was curious, just off of that note with the 4 nations, we know that Matthews played for USA, Marner Canada, Nylander Sweden. What do you think the dynamics are like in the locker room when guys come back? Obviously, they go, right back into all business. But is there ever sort of a moment where they have a little fun with one another about how things went down?
Oh, yeah, I'm sure they do. They're just not going to publicize it. That's where you need to have some sources like you do. But, yeah, no, I do think there's some challenges back from something like that. No question about it.
I was just thinking, I'm sure some of the lead, I could just see some of the guys in there, just the ones also that didn't play, that watched the entire tournament. I'm sure they've got their own. I think that's so fascinating, is thinking, what do the guys think that play in the NHL that watch this? What are their thoughts Because that's such a different perspective than former players or coaches or whatever. It's like these are the guys that are with them every single day that also want to represent their country and be there. So I'm sure Austin Matthews is feeling the heat just being part of the Leafs and part of Team USA. He's on both sides. Like that's a tough place for Matthews to be, but of course he's an ultimate professional.
Oh, he's a special player. I think everybody knows that. Forget what happened, in the final last Thursday. The truth of the matter is, if the Toronto Maple Leafs are going to win the Stanley Cup, Austin Matthews is going to put his fingerprints all over it, and he has to. I talked to Mario again, not trying to name drop, but talked to Mario about Austin Matthews, and he has so much respect for the way the guy plays and the calm, cool, collected nature. The way he handles a puck and shoots the puck in traffic, he's really, really blown away by him. And Mario's a hard marker. I can tell you that right now. So I think Austin, if whatever Toronto does in a good way or a bad way, his fingerprints are going to be on it, no matter what.
When you were talking with Mario, did you guys talk about, I imagine, but just Sidney Crosby and just I don't want to say resurgence because he's always been a really great player, but it just felt like he's just such an electric player that can rise to the occasion regardless of the situation. And at this age, like, is there anything Mario said about even just the way Crosby has been playing? Not necessarily, he'd missed a couple games for Pittsburgh, but just at the international level that maybe in what way he was able to take it to another level.
Yeah, Mario's blown away by the consistency in Sid's game. He has talked about that with me. The other part is the work habits of Sidney Crosby. They're infectious. And when players come into Pittsburgh and they see how hard Sidney prepares every single day, game in and game out, they're almost guilted into having to work that hard. Now, is this a great Pittsburgh Penguin team? No. Are they going to make the playoffs? No. 3 straight years without playoffs. That can't be strapped on Sidney Crosby's back. I mean, this guy's doing everything that he can to try to make this team win. There's just not a very good supporting cast. They are definitely in the beginning phases of a massive rebuild. They can say whatever they want. This team needs to be rebuilt in Pittsburgh.
Do you think he's going to be there for the rest of his career? Would you guess?
Hard to say. I know what he said publicly. I have not talked or spoken with him about it, so I don't know what the long-term situation will be. I know that there are a lot of former Penguin players that would love to see him win another Stanley Cup. Just not sure that could happen in Pittsburgh. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. I don't like to speculate on it, but I just know one thing. He's still got plenty of game left. He really does, Julie. He's got plenty of game left.
Man, he surprised me. I had no idea what to expect from him at the international level with these guys. And, just I don't want to say his age. I mean, I'm the same age as him. As I'm reminded by whenever I see 87, that's the year I was born as well. And I'm like, damn, that guy's just, it hurts me to get out of bed in the morning. I'm like, this guy's out there. He's just so consistently good. He's just got that, he has that extra gene that, do you remember that ISO that was on him when he was getting ready for the Canada-USA game? And he's just, dialed in like no other. As soon as I saw that, I thought, oh boy, that's the face of somebody who is, I don't know. I don't even know. Living in a different galaxy than pretty much everyone else. But let's get back to the Leafs in that they have an interesting week coming up. They've got Boston on Tuesday, and then they're going to be coming over to my part of town and taking on the Rangers. And that is, by the way, a very pricey ticket, if you can imagine. Leafs, Rangers, Friday night, MSG. But that's nothing that Leafs fans will be surprised about. But it's really just unfortunate for fans. But okay, so we got Bruins, who we know are without Charlie McAvoy and have had some struggles. What do you think? What do you think's the biggest matchup in this one?
Well, I think they can win all 3 games. They started the road trip in Chicago. They won 5-2 last night. They're into Boston, like you said, Tuesday. They play the Rangers on Friday, as you said correctly, Julian. And then they're into Pittsburgh for a Sunday afternoon matinee. I think they can run the table with all these teams. Boston is not a formidable foe right now. Boston's really struggling for an identity. The New York Rangers, I watched them play yesterday. They only had 16 shots on goal, and they still won the game. The Rangers are really discombobulated right now. And for the Pittsburgh Penguins, as I said before, they're in the beginning stages of a massive overhaul. Again, they can say whatever they want publicly. You just watch it and you see they need a rebuild. So I think the Toronto Maple Leafs can run the table with these 3 teams coming up, and it would be a great 4-0 road trip to start this second or the last quarter of the season. And, if they do run the table, that's 5 straight wins coming out of the World or the 4 Nations, which is phenomenal.
So if you expect them to run the table and they don't, what would you think?
That somebody didn't show up or they didn't get good enough goaltending. But they went on that West Coast road trip just before the break, and I thought they played fantastically well. The only game they lost, I believe, was in Vancouver. So I thought they played great in Edmonton, great in Calgary, really good in Seattle, and off tight loss. Tough game against Vancouver, but it was a tight game. I've got full confidence in this team. I don't see them letting their guard down. I just don't think Craig Berube's that kind of a coach, and I don't think the leadership component of the team is going to allow that to happen this year.
Pierre, you mentioned a lack of identity for the Bruins, kind of seeing that with the Rangers. When you notice how important is a team's identity for them to be able to go on a long run?
It's really important because there's a trust factor that's built up once you establish an identity. And I think for the New York Rangers, there's been a lack of trust and a lack of identity for a long time. And I think it goes back to last summer with the Jacob Trouba situation. Is he going to be traded? Is he not going to be traded? How'd that stuff make its way into the newspaper so quickly? Then you started reading about Zibanejad potentially being traded, or Chris Kreider potentially being traded, or, complaining about the way Adam Fox has been playing. There's so many things you wonder about coming out of the New York Rangers camp. So I don't think they have an identity. I think it's been a big problem for them most of this season.
Right. And you can tell a lot of the locker room is they seem to be a little disinterested at times. And I say that disinterested is a very kind way of saying they just look very lost and almost, what is the word? It looks like they've disassociated sometimes. Mika Zibanejad does, which I hope everything's okay. It was nice to see him score a goal for Sweden. And I watched him against Finland. I was really shocked. I was like, whoa. Mika just scored, because I haven't seen that all year. But that will be a fun, great matchup between 2 original 6 teams. As we know, it's always great when guys get to play at the Garden, and it's just a lot of fun and they got TD Garden, and then they get MSG, and then they go to Pittsburgh. So a lot of very important Eastern Conference teams for them to beat. As you said, if they can run the table this week, that would put them in very good position, I'm sure, also points-wise, but also confidence-wise. And then we'll have to see only a bit of time left for the trade deadline. As we know, that's March 7th, which is coming very soon. February's a weird month. I know there's no leap year this year, but yeah, it's coming very soon. So it's like in the next 2 weeks. February just zooms right by. January is the longest month of the entire year, and then February is gone in a blink of an eye. And then we're so close to playoffs, even sort of like on the cusp of them starting. So Leafs look like they're in a good position right now if everyone can kind of stay healthy. And I guess, Pierre, any final thoughts on sort of this big week ahead for them and as they look ahead to the deadline?
Well, you just nailed it, I think. If the Leafs can run the table, they solidify their playoff position, not just in the playoff, but to basically win the Atlantic Division. I'm really confident for them. I do think they'll be proactive going into the trade deadline, which is really encouraging. If you're a fan, player, or coach of the Toronto Maple Leafs, And we'll see how they do. But I personally have so much confidence in this team. It's probably the most confidence I've had in this team since Pat Quinn was their coach.
Right. I know you said that, which also makes me worried that it's the hope that kills you sometimes, because we get this. We're like, wait, this is the best Leafs team we've ever seen. They could win the Stanley Cup. And as Leafs fans they've been through a lot. So it's sort of hard to get to that point of actually imagining a Stanley Cup, I think. Dan definitely touches on that all the time. And he thinks that Leafs fans actually just want to be miserable. But I don't subscribe to whatever Dan's theories on the Leafs fans are. It's an exciting time for the Leafs, and it was exciting that we all got to see the Four Nations face off, and that, of course, Pierre was there. So jealous of you for being able to be there for that overtime. Okay, I just got to ask, were people just like, were they just screaming? Like, were they just like, was it just chaos in the stands?
Chaos is probably a kind word. I think there was a lot of nervous energy. Yeah, for sure. On both sides.
I bet. Jordan Binnington did himself some huge wonders, and I know that a lot of teams will be looking at him and probably talking to Doug Armstrong about Jordan Binnington before the trade deadline, as we have discussed the Blues are going to be selling, as we've heard. Not confirmed, but it looks like they will be. All right, Pierre, thank you so much for breaking down everything Leafs as we head into an exciting week, and always a pleasure, and have a great time at the rest of your Mario Lemieux fantasy camp.
Thanks a lot, Julie. Always a pleasure to be with you. Take care.
Thanks for watching Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.